question. Let's not bury the. Does he have a case? I mean, can he?
I think he does have a case.
Tell me why.
Well, I'll tell you, there's some complexities to this, okay? One of the things, and Hayes was right. So let's just go over who the parties are, because this is going to help to answer a lot of the questions I think you have. Jaden Rashada is the plaintiff, okay? His lawyer is Rusty Harden, right?
The Houston guy.
The Houston guy.
Okay.
He's been in
right.
Nolan Ryland, a whole bunch of huge sports figures.
I didn't know that.
He's 87.
Right. Their other co-counsel
This is Roger Clemens' guy. I didn't know that's who he had.
Their other counsel is David Paul. I know David just a little bit. His partner, Andrew Knopf, he's a rock star lawyer. They just came up here. Andrew got a $147 million verdict in a case against Ford. Okay,
so he's got the right people representing him.
Right people representing. And what's interesting, so he's the plaintiff, right? He's suing Hugh Hathcock, right? Billy Napier, Marcus Castro Walker, and this Velocity Automotive Solutions, okay? So, not suing UF, okay? This $13 million offer or contract is not attached, right? Because they're not going on a breach of contract theory. They're going on fraud theories and negligent misrepresentation.
What's the difference? That's great stuff. What's the difference?
It's a big deal, right? Typically, we have contracts so that we know that there is a meeting of the minds, right? And so we go and we write everything down because we want to not have, right? We don't want to be in a lawsuit, right? And so typically in a breach of contract, we're trying to figure out who breached it, who didn't do the things that they said that they were going to do.
And Exhibit A is the contract.
Right. So what's interesting here is UF is not a party to it, nor is a collective, okay? And there are a couple of interesting things when you go through this lawsuit. Hugh Hathcock had his own collective. When Jaden Rashada came to the University of Florida, this is in the complaint, he met Hugh Hathcock. He happened to be there on campus. Hugh supposedly has, and they say this in the complaint, $500,000. And it was Hugh who helped to drive this. But then at one point, he had a collective. I'd never heard of it before I read this complaint, the Gator Guard Collective. He then at one point said, hey, I'm selling my dealership. We should run this through the other collective. And if you take, and we got to remember, this complaint is the plaintiff's side of the story, okay? Billy Napier, everybody else, they're going to be filing their answers, right? And one thing that's important for everybody to know, this is filed in federal court, okay? Basically in the Panhandle, okay? And it's in the United States District Court, federal, not state. And it's in the Pensacola division, okay? And the reason they did that is because Hugh Hathcock and his dealership that was supposed to be a party to this money that was offered to Jaden Rashada, right? They're located there, but who's going to be out there? Prospective jurors, right? Seminoles, Auburn fans. That ain't a Gator hotbed. So I thought that was a pretty interesting venue selection, and a place to put it. The other thing is this complaint, we'll put it up on the website at the firm or whatever for people to want to read it. I started getting texts, hey, do you got the complaint? Right. Send it to me. Is very detailed. And, fraud allegations have to be specifically pled in state court, but a state court complaint would probably be 12, 13 pages.
Yeah, hand me that.
This is 40 pages.
Look at this.
And I'll show you guys.
Look at this.
I
want you to see this. Look at this.
Well, and here's what's
There's
interesting.
40 pages of complaint.
And what's interesting and really cool with the drafting is the tweets
are in there
that people were putting out. Get ready tomorrow, guys. Good day for the Gators. And they're putting
the
the
tweets are in the
in
complaint.
There. Who said what and who was offered what at the time.
Are there any Hayes Carline tweets in the complaint? That's what I want to know.
He was complaining about Billy Napier, so it wasn't really a problem.
All right.
But what's really interesting, in there is that their responses will have to be pled in depth as well. Because in federal court, you can have portions of your case dismissed or whatever. So we're going to hear from Hugh Hathcock. We're going to hear from Billy Napier. And what's interesting is this Marcus Castro Walker. Was he an employee of the UAA?
He was on staff.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, they say he was the NIL liaison.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine he had to be an employee because he was handling NIL for Florida.
Right.
In terms of looking at it from the Florida side of it, so the Castro Walker, I'm assuming he has no money. So in terms
more
of
likely than not,
this
right?
Kind,
in terms of who's going to settle this, do you think he's wanting Napier to cut a check, Hathcock to cut a check, and how big will that check need to be to settle this?
Well, as you said, this goes back to the motivations of the parties, and so we talked about that a little bit. We don't see this $13 million contract. And so I thought the complaint was pretty impressive. The facts were pretty damaging. As a Gator fan, I sure didn't want to see that. But I will tell you this, the one thing that doesn't add up to me and that's fishy is that Jaden says he had a $9.5 million deal with Miami. And so when we talk about the discovery with each of these different colleges will be very interesting. I disagree. I don't think Georgia wants to see this go forward. We'll talk about why in a minute. He says, I have a $9.5 million deal. That, what they say in the complaint, that was pretty much locked down. Their attempt to flip Jaden Rashada was to keep throwing money by way of these deals when enough of the money went up. Then out of nowhere, in one, 2 paragraphs, they say, when Jaden went to Arizona State, he didn't receive any money, nor did he at Georgia because he was done with NIL. He had learned his lesson. Well, then what's the measure of damages, right? Are you a $9 million quarterback? Or are you a $13 million quarterback? Or now are you a $0 quarterback? Where I think something could be clear, and it appears that they do have some specific evidence, I would think from the way it's pled, the expectations the judge would have is on signing day.
Right.
They say Billy Napier said, man, you need to do this. These guys are good for the money. Hugh Hathcock is up in the air. There's $1 million coming to you. You need to sign the letter of intent. His agents and everybody said, we don't have the agreement. Get the agreement to us. And so in a show of good faith, he signed his letter of intent to Florida and never received that $1 million. I think that's a pretty strong case, getting away from whatever this agreement said.
Okay, but if there's not an agreement, what evidence is there? Is there a tape recording? Because if there's a tape recording, are they allowed to tape Billy without his knowledge? What evidence would there be? It's he said, right?
I'll give you an example, right? You love Bruce Springsteen, right?
Yes, I do.
So there's a little house up the street, and I go, do you know that Bruce Springsteen actually grew up right down the street from 1010XL? And you'd go, no, I'm telling you, this is Bruce Springsteen's house. I'll sell it to you for $5 million. It's a house that would go for $89,000.
Right.
The contract wouldn't matter because what it would be, the fraud would be. You got to remember, somebody has to make a false statement. You have to rely on it and be in a worse position. Yeah. And so Jaden Rashada is saying, listen, I switched schools. I decommitted. I walked from a $9.5 million deal. So it's not dictated. It's not like an employment agreement. What they have pled, the reason Florida's not a part of it, they're saying these individuals defrauded me. What they say in here, they were never coming through with the money. They never did come through with the money.
But how can I prove that you told me that about Bruce Springsteen's house if there's no contract? It's my word versus your word.
No, but then we get into text messages and other things, and that's what they say they have.
Okay, so then there's your evidence then. So
right.
If there's text messages, if there's a text message from Billy Napier saying they're good for the money, well, then I think someone's getting sued. Someone's going to win a
right.
case.
And so you can see here in the way that they would break it down in the complaint, because it kind of goes to what you're saying. This is just an example of placing there. Hathcock felt so confident that his fraudulent promises would persuade Jaden to commit to UF that he tweeted, tomorrow will be a great day for the Gators.
I remember the tweet. You do too, I bet.
Right. Well, they're showing here, at the same time in the early morning, Zager reported the status of the negotiations to Harlan, who's another intermediary, and he says, contracts drafted, reviewing this AM, we'll lock in value with you here. I think Jaden will be able to sign this by tonight. If y'all are ready, then I'll keep you in the loop. There are all these communications, and the document's not coming. The things aren't getting signed.
Right.
The money didn't ever come. Now, I do believe, at least from what I've read in this complaint, there was an agreement by the other collective who isn't sued, and because it's not a breach of contract action, you don't have to have the contract as part of it. So that is a big part of it, and it'll play into it, but it's not really a part of their theories. They're saying, I switched schools, I walked away from deals, and I did it because they were promising me things. They never came through, and we believe they never intended to make good on any of it.
Why wouldn't Georgia, where Rashada currently is now, not want to see this lawsuit continue?
Because if they hired Brett Hastings and they said, you got to come in here and represent Billy Napier, I'd say, well, this is the measure of damages, so I want to know everything I can about your NIL. I want to get all essentially your trade secrets. And you got to remember is that when we're going to get discovery,
nobody wants to be investigated, is what you're saying.
Well, but you got to understand this: discovery is what could lead to admissible evidence. It's not what comes in trial. It's much broader.
Right.
So the judges will. You're going to get stuff that Georgia wouldn't want you to get.
Final thing here. Because you think he's got a case. Sounds like you've read all 40 pages. You think he's got a case.
I think from what I know now, signing a letter of intent and being promised $1 million coming, right, is there. They say he was terminated under the $13 million deal, and they never bring something up with that. That makes me think there was a valid termination on the $13 million.
I would think the whole question comes down to, can he prove that he was promised that? That's first, right? Let's assume that you're assuming that there's a pretty good chance, based on who you said his attorneys are, they must think so. I don't think they take the case. But couldn't this be, and we're going real late here, so I got to go quick, but couldn't this be groundbreaking? I mean, if he wins anything of significance, how many other student athletes are going to say they didn't get the NIL that they were promised? I mean, I've got to believe that's going to be rampant all over college athletics.
I don't believe it is. I think it's factually specific. It's hard for me to say as a Gator. This was Keystone Cops. This was, hey, come here. I mean, some of the other things they say in here is, hey, man, get your what do they say? Tell Jaden we look forward to setting him up for life. We need to set up Jaden's brokerage accounts right now because he's going to have so much money.
Who said that, allegedly?
This Edward Rojas, who is the CEO of the Gator Collective, who's not sued.
Yeah.
But there was a point where Hathcock said, hey, I want the money to run through you. And so they were sending these things to him all the time.
So you think there's something there, and you don't necessarily think this will kickstart a lot of these around the country.
Right, because we talked about Georgia.
Yeah.
Miami believes they had a signed deal that he got out of that was $9.5 million. So that's where all the other discovery goes. And don't think Miami's there to help Florida out in this regard.
Real quick, who's cutting the check if it settles, Napier or Hathcock?
I think Hathcock, because when you look at this.
So really, the worst case scenario is a Florida booster loses out on some money.
Reading between the lines, and I don't know this, I think Napier was always relying on him to come through. I don't know why he didn't come through if he really does have a $500 million net worth, but it was really clear they were constantly saying, hey, man, the check's in the mail. And that's really what you see in the complaint.
You never got it. Great work. Brett Hastings from the Hastings Injury Law Firm. We're going to drag you back in here to talk more about this because it's going to be in the news all about every day, I would imagine.
Yeah,
Thanks, Brett.
It's not going away.
Back in a moment. 10-10.